In life, there's always certainties. In game week 1, it's Antonio Conte having a meltdown. Welcome to the Anglo-Italian podcast. My name is Adam, and this week I'm joined by our very good friend. You would have known him as the Fiorentina fan, but he now calls himself the Calcio Fiore account, and that is Andrea. Andrea, nice having you on this fine evening. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. Thanks for having me. Bit better knowing the results around Serie A, so it made me feel a little better about the Fiorentina result. But apart from that, all well.
Great stuff. You certainly have a lot more optimism for the season ahead, that's for sure. And
Yeah.
we've been talking offline during this summer, so it's great. And look, we've had game week 1 come and hit us in the face. Some of us managed to actually watch it because despite Serie A and FIGC's efforts, they tried to ensure that there was no piracy taking place. But don't worry, we didn't go to those lengths, did we, Andrea? But let's start off by talking about the fixtures that did take place. So I'm going to start, listener and viewers, by talking and digesting the results that did take place. So starting off on Saturday, Genoa and Inter kicks off and they drew 2-2. Then we follow it up with Parma drawing 1-1 with Fiorentina, AC Milan drawing at home to Torino 2-2, and Empoli drawing 0-0 with Monza. On Sunday, we saw Bologna draw 1-1 against Udinese. Hellas Verona causing potentially the shock of the round, beating Napoli 3-0. Calgary holding Roma to a 0-0 draw. And Roma's near city rivals Lazio winning against Venezia 3-1. And then on Monday night, we saw Lecce losing at home to Atalanta 4-0. And Juventus getting off to a fantastic start against Como, winning 3-0. Andrea, obviously lots of talking points, so we're going to just dive into it. And I think the biggest talking point we have to bring up is what I introed at the very beginning, and that is Antonio Conte. Now, obviously, we will try and do some justice here, Andrea, and talk about Hellas Verona as well. But I think the key talking point is Napoli and that collapse. There was a lot made out about the tactics, the formation, even the personnel that were in that Napoli squad. Obviously, wasn't helped by Conte at the very beginning of his press conference on Friday, alluding to the fact that he doesn't feel that he's got the personnel. He thinks it could be not necessarily ground zero, as he put in his own words, but it's going to take some time to get people through the door. Now, Andrea, through the summer, there's been a lot of rumours about rifts and maybe fights between him and De Laurentiis. But were you expecting a performance as placid as we saw there against Hellas Verona?
Definitely not. I'm actually still in denial that game happened. It was surreal. Honestly, because at least with a Conte team, you'd always expect a bit of like fight and desire because that's what they're known
Yeah.
for. Like, getting the best out of players who aren't that great or maybe who are kind of squad players. Like he's always been good at that.
Mm.
But yeah, it's just I'm still in disbelief that this happened. And even regarding the personnel on the team, yeah, that you'd thought they'd be good enough still to get a win over the line, but yeah, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but it feels like that he still hasn't really worked out his core team. Like even when I look at the personnel that he had for that particular game week against Hellas Verona, like the type of players that he had in his team just were a bit baffling to me. I don't know about you, but I think the key for me, and I've just made it as a note, was that they were overrun in midfield. Like Lobotka looks lost. He needs someone that can kind of do the running. Now, look, obviously they lost players like Zielinski in the summer, and Grisa is there. But I mean, even still, I'm looking at that squad, and I'm still unsure what Conte was trying to achieve. You know, Mazzocchi, I think he's a sentiment buy from last season, not necessarily putting it on. Spinazzola, his debut wasn't fantastic. Juan Jesus, I think that was the big one out of it. You know, how is this guy still playing? There's lots of flaws in this team. I mean, do you think that the real issues have developed from longer periods, so i.e., much further than just last season? is it a case that, this squad was on its last legs when they won the Scudetto, and actually it needs a whole new transformation?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd agree with that. And I think what's frustrating if I was a Napoli fan is the fact that players like Juan Jesus, Romani, like you could clearly see last season that they weren't really up to the level that they needed
No.
to push forward. And they're in the lineup for the first game of the season. Like it's mind blowing. So I definitely think that a lot of squad players that are still there haven't been moved on. And obviously a lot of quality hasn't been put in place either. And I think
Mm,
that's throughout the team as well. And we even look at the upfront situation, obviously with Osimhen. There's a whole speculation on that, but even going forward in the attacking third, like Simeone started the game, who again was a squad player. Politano, a lot of question marks over him. So when you
yeah.
look at the whole 11 that played on that game, a lot of them shouldn't be there, and
Mm,
it's quite worrying that they've got that lineup going into game week 2, for example. So they've really got to try and do a clear out. But the issue is you can't really clear out a whole team in one window, right? So
no.
it's what do they do to manage it, and how does Conte get the best out of certain players to kind of make a good 11 work? So that I think that will be the key. Like Conte's really good at that. He's done that in the past. He's got the best out of the very most average players. So he's going to have to try and
Yeah.
find that as well in quite a lot of these Napoli players that are still there.
What have you made of the window itself, though, in general? Because there has been a few players, and I talked about this in the preview for the run-up of the season, that there's been a lot of players linked, but they've not necessarily been able to either get those deals over the line, or those players have moved on to other clubs. There was like the case of Bresciani, for example, it looks imminent that he was going to join Napoli, and then suddenly he's off to Atalanta. And it's really strange that they've not been able to do that. Do you think there's a genuine like kind of power struggle at the club, and the sense that we know from last and previous seasons actually De Laurentiis likes to have a control of the kind of purse strings. He likes to have a kind of control around the footballing philosophy and the type of players that they bring in. Do you think there is a clash, and could we see potentially like Antonio Conte losing it in the next few weeks and potentially leaving Napoli?
I think at the current time that is a real strong possibility, and it's really unbelievable to say, but I really do think so. I just think again, Napoli have always been a team that kind of seems to leave it late. Like only David Neres
Mm,
is just about signed, I believe. So
yeah,
again, and the game week's already started, and that's a massive player that was going to improve the first team. So definitely, there's a lot of issues with the transfers. Obviously, the whole Osimhen situation, like that's still ongoing, which is
mm,
unbelievable when he's clearly wanting to leave the
yeah,
since like
100%.
January, pretty much. So yeah, all this stuff has been going on. But I just wanted to ask you: do you think the transfers that Napoli need? Do you think it's mainly in attack, or would you say the midfield would need a bit more booster?
Do you know what? I think they need, like, probably I would agree with Conte's sentiments that it's across the board. I don't
Yeah,
feel comfortable in defensive aspect. I don't feel comfortable necessarily in the midfield. And, whilst we're kind of speculating that Osimhen is probably going to go off, I don't think they're doing a good enough job of making players like Kvaratskhelia be happy. I mean, I think probably he'd be kind of questioning whether he wants to sign another contract. And, he's probably seen Zielinski move on and thinking, probably I might do the same. And he's not, by all accounts, well paid. He's rumoured that he's on a pittance in comparison to some of the kind of attacking players in Serie A. So I think that's a big worry. And I think the real issue is potentially De Laurentiis not allowing people to kind of have control of that kind of philosophy and the style of play. And we saw that with obviously Spalletti and his exit at the time, just the way that De Laurentiis went about that business wasn't kind of really forthcoming. So I think there are some really big issues to be kind of contended with here. But yeah, I suppose if I quickly pose it to yourself quickly, where did you see Napoli kind of finishing off this season? Because both me and myself and Rory kind of speculated that they'd be at least in the top four based on that performance. I think we've both got egg on our faces. So where did you kind of see Napoli at the beginning of this season?
I think as at the start before, like in beginning of July, I was thinking Conte comes in, they could push for second. I was very confident. Obviously, Conte's done it before with Chelsea. He's come in and won the league, for example. But as I got nearer to the first game week with the signings they haven't made and the lineup they produced against Verona, even before the game kicked off, I thought they'd still win, but I looked at that team like that team's not going to go far. But at the same time, I'm thinking that Conte, with his ideology of football, you'd think he'd at least get them to a fourth position or maybe a fifth to get Champions League football. So that's kind of where I'm going with. I'm kind of still believing that they can still turn it around despite this heavy loss, because I do feel like players will come in, and for their sake, hopefully Lukaku sorts out and that he comes in because Conte really
Yeah.
wants him. So once he has kind of those few players, unfortunately, he can't get the full players he wants because it's not ideal and it's not possible in one window. But at least if he gets certain few in like Lukaku and stuff, I think he can mold that team to how he wants it, and it could push on. No European football will play a part. And at the end of the day, as we've seen, it's game week 1. A lot of off results in general, anyway.
Yeah.
So I think they're not going to be too worried at this stage that they might be so behind. So they've got a lot of they've got catch up to do, but they definitely can still be about.
We wouldn't do any justice without kind of talking about Hellas Verona. What a result it was from their point of view. But what gets me, Andrea, is every time we kind of talk about previews and predictions for the season, I always have Hellas Verona to get relegated. This time round, I didn't, purely because I feel like I'm a curse. Every time I say it, it doesn't happen. And this despite the fact that, this club has for every season sold a majority of their players on. They're having to balance the books. And on this occasion, it wasn't that long ago that they looked like financially that they could be bankrupt. They're that kind of position. A lot of credit, obviously, to Paolo Zanetti for the performance, but we have to kind of praise the signings that they've done. And look, I'm going to praise my co-host here, Rory. He did a fantastic thread on Twitter or X for those that do follow it. So please make sure you check it out. But he talked about the actual director there at Hellas Verona, who's done a phenomenal job in terms of what he's managed to bring into the club and obviously then managed to sell on. So just to kind of give you a kind of flavor of this, obviously Livramento was one of those players that he managed to bring in from CD America. They only signed him on for £600,000. Muslera, who scored the double, they signed him from £700,000 from MVV Maastricht, who are like the second division of Eredivisie, so essentially second league in the Dutch league. But just to kind of give a bit more flavour, so it's Sean Seglione, who is the director of football at Hellas Verona. So his record is absolutely phenomenal, just for those that don't know about his work. So in 2004 to 2011, he took Teresi from Eccellenza to Serie B, which is a fantastic, phenomenal achievement. Then in 2012 to 2015 season, he came to Hellas for his first spell, got them promoted to Serie A, signed the likes of Iturbu, Tony, Krunic, and Golini. So there's a few household names there in itself. Then in 2016 to 2019, he finds himself in Bari, gets them promoted back to Serie C, which was a fantastic achievement. And then 2019 to 2022, he's at Padova, gets them to the playoffs 3 times, which included 2 final losses. Then back in Hellas Verona for 22-23 season. So currently, he's managed to achieve £91 million profit in his time. So this will be obviously euros rather than pounds, getting him to at least finish 17th and 13th. Obviously, a lot of credit to Marco Baroni for last season. But if I look at the kind of names that he's managed to bring in, the likes of Ngosh, who was obviously one of those players that was now in the Napoli squad, signed for 550k, sold for 80 million euros. Juan Cabral, who obviously recently went to Juventus, signed for 3.5 million, sold for 12.8 million euros. Dijin Nozolin signed for £3 million, sold for 8.9 million euros. And Caprari, another one, signed for 5 million, sold for 8 million euros. I mean, yeah, Hellas Verona completely just baffled me as a club. Every season they seem to have a fantastic scouting network, and these guys seem to go under the radar. I mean, from your point of view, Andrea, are you surprised that someone like him hasn't been snapped up by the likes of, say, a Milan or someone else?
Very surprised. Honestly, the stats speak for themselves. And what's interesting as well is that these players that you've mentioned, not only have they done well, they've made instant impact, which is something that a lot of players struggle when they go to a new country, new league. It's very
Yeah,
normal to have a struggle, but they make instant impact. 2 goals from Oscara. It's unheard of. But yeah, definitely. I even was thinking about the Iturbi Lucatoni days, because that was a dynamo duo back then. Got me remembering that. That was incredible. But even those, like, out of nowhere, and then I think Lucatoni was top scorer that year. So one of the
yeah.
years then. So, like, yeah, literally, it's making, like, pretty much you'll see something as nothing into something special that no one would see. It's
Yeah.
incredible. So yeah, I'm very surprised no one has picked up on that.
Well, credit to Hellas. They were on top of Serie A for a brief period of time because unfortunately Atalanta knocked them off with a 4-0 win against Lecce. And yeah, Andrea, the words that I've got here is winning the transfer window because as we speak this evening, it seems like Raul Bellanova is going to be signed from Torino. Again, a player that I cannot believe he's not been snapped up by a big club. I was surprised at the time when Inter actually allowed him to go off. They had the opportunity to sign him from, at the time, Calgary, and they let him go. But again, today it seems like it's permanent. Bilal Torre, who's a player that I did rate, and I thought Gasperini would get the most out of him. He's now signed for Stuttgart on loan with an obligation to purchase, which looks like it's going to be around the fee of 18 to 20 million because it includes add-ons as well. But this team is phenomenal. Again, against Lecce, they displayed such a fantastically strong performance. And this despite the fact that they've still got a few injuries in the camp. Scamacca is probably going to be looking enviously because he can see his replacement, Retegui, score a double, one from the penalty spot. And Bresciani, that's the guy that we talked about in the Napoli section. He looked phenomenal. I've rated him since that Frosinone performance last season, but he's really pushing on. And I would not be surprised if we see Bresciani in a Azzurri shirt in the future. But what do you make of Atalanta? Because this story seems phenomenal. And they are, like, for me, everyone's kind of favourites in terms of dark horses to at least win the Scudetto. But everyone's kind of favourites outside of the top four to actually do it. So, yeah, what do you make of this Atalanta story? It's phenomenal, right?
Yeah, phenomenal is the exact word. From top to bottom, from buying players, like Scamacca was injured, and within literally 48 hours, Retegi's in. Like, you can't make this up.
Yeah.
It's incredible. The structure of identifying the right player, the right personnel for the manager fits in, and that makes a difference. But also, it's credit a lot has to go to Gasperini as well. Like, the system, the style of play, he knows what players suit it, and then they make instant impact. Even like the Bresciani deal, falls off of Napoli,
Mm,
takes advantage of it, and already shows how he's a potential to be a big player this season in Serie A. But yeah, I just think they get everything spot on. They just analyze everything to detail, and they add to their squad in
yeah.
the right way. They don't panic, and they don't overspend either. They really get good deals for players as well. You don't tend to see them spend a lot of money, but the right amount are
Yeah.
in good value. And then obviously they can sell them on for a huge profit as well, which they've done in the past as well. But it just seems no matter what players they lose, they're able to bring someone just as good, if not better. And that's a perfect example of how everyone wants their clubs to run. Even if they do have to lose the big players, they can get those players in that can make the difference still. But yeah, they from top to bottom, the club is just run perfectly, and I think they've shown it through the years. So I don't think it's unheard of to say that they could challenge for the Scudetto. I really think they've got everything in place. With other teams
Mm,
around them looking a bit unsure, like Milan and Juventus, I'm still a bit unsure about them. I'm sure we'll get on to that later on.
yeah, we
And
will.
also Inter also, I mean, should be the favourites, but they also might have some frailties, which I'm sure we'll get onto as well. But yeah, I think overall they've been consistent enough to show that they could definitely challenge this year.
What about Lecce? Because I think they're one of these sides that have over delivered over the last few seasons. They've done really well considering the way that they've approached themselves. They don't spend a lot of money. Are you worried based on this performance that they're probably going to struggle this season, especially with Luca Gotti, who's a bit more pragmatic with the style of football? But are you worried about maybe their chances of staying up in the league this season?
Yeah, I'm very worried, to be fair. I actually was very I praised the decision when they got him in to help them stay up because I thought he was the right
Mm,
guy to keep them up, but I just thought they had to change it. So yeah, it was quite surprising that
yeah.
they stuck with him. Um, but yeah, I'm definitely a bit worried. I just think the strength in what they have and the players they have, they've sold quite a few strong players as well. So it's about replacing them as well. But it's a bit difficult with their budget and also, their position in the table. Not many players would want to go there. But it's not like other teams that have, that kind of stuff in place to get those players in. Um, but yeah, I'm a bit worried. What do you think? Lecce have any chance if they sign maybe like a few players coming to the end of the window?
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't seen a lot of rumours, let's put it that way. The one player that I have high hopes is the Polish midfielder they brought in from Lech Poznan, which is Filip Markwinski. Now, he had a fantastic pre-season for Lecce. By all accounts, he's really impressing the kind of personnel down there. The problem will be is obviously it's going to take him a little while to adapt to the league, potentially a bit like Kvaratskhelia, a bit of an unknown in terms of the quantity. And this is what I think with Lecce, they are all about bringing considered purchases. They don't buy necessarily players for the sake of it. They think about the overall picture is, if we bring this player in, what's the impact? Can they do a job for us, for example? So I don't think they'll do like a Salernitana where they kind of randomly get some journeymen in and, fill the boots. It's going to be very interesting in this mercato, in terms of are they going to be able to do the deals that maybe clubs don't want? And I think there's going to be a few loan deals. I think it's going to go to the wire personally with Lecce. I think they will realise that they need to bring in some extra players. I like Kristovic, for example, Pomgrancic. Obviously, he's now with you, for example. Almqvist is one that I was very surprised that they didn't decide to keep on because he's transferred to Parma, and I think that's a phenomenal bit of business for Parma. But so they've got a tradition where they seem to be they don't purchase at a high price. It's all about developing them to sell on at a higher price. I worry with them, and I think they're going to have to lean very heavily towards maybe your likes of Milan, for example, to get those loan type players. It's like I've seen today, Marco Nestri, for example, from Milan. He's confirmed to be going to Cremonese, which is in Serie B. Now, could he have been someone that could have played at Lecce's level? I think so, personally. So there's a kind of few combinations there that I think maybe Lecce have maybe let themselves down. Maybe they need a better scouting infrastructure to maybe probably just show, there is a potential out there. It's just interesting. We'll see how this window goes, but I do fear for them. I think they'll be hovering at least around those relegation places this season, but I don't think they are the worst because I think the worst team is Venezia at this moment in time, and we'll see what kind of business they can do. But let's kind of move ourselves on. I want to talk about Milan. So Milan, they have there was a lot of optimism, should I say, at the start of the season. But Torino really thumped them, almost got the win on the day. And, credit to Paolo Vanelli, who they brought in from Venezia, and he looks like an instant upgrade on Juric to some respects because he hasn't got the temperament of Juric, but he's certainly got the playing philosophy. And just the way they played against Milan, they didn't let them kind of settle, didn't give them a moment's rest. And this was a team in Torino that we kind of, me, myself, and Rory kind of questioned, are they going to be any better than mid-table? Are they going to struggle for one? We didn't see great signings through the door. Shea Adams being one of maybe the kind of talismanic signings in this window. And you kind of question, is that enough? Is that going to be enough to keep them up in the league? But they proved what they can do. They've got staples in their squads, like the likes of Zapata, who has become the captain for this season. Raul Balanova, if he was still there, then obviously, again, that's another good player, but it looks like he's inevitably going to be signed for Atalanta by the time this podcast goes out. So, that's a great squad. But back to Milan, there was high hopes for them. And Fonseca, and it needed a player that they were tempted to shift out of the door, Noah Okafor, to get that equaliser. Obviously, Alvaro Morata scores, but I think from what I could see, the reaction is that it was much of the same. Nothing really changed. Do you think there is maybe a culture within that Milan squad that needs to be shifted out? And where do you see the weaknesses in this Milan squad?
Yeah, definitely. I think there is a cultural thing that they need to kind of get a new kind of identity. Definitely, I think it's kind of
Mm,
it feels like similar than last year as well. The kind of what
yeah.
they played game week 1, it felt very similar, even though it's a different manager. I think the issue for them is kind of that like playmaker role in midfield, like the attacking mid, kind of centre mid. I feel like um, or they give more trust to certain players, or they might look at someone just to bring in. Because I feel like sometimes they just go wide too quick, and I feel
Mm,
like they need to play through the middle a bit more as well. And I don't know if the quality in midfield is lacking, or they're told to do that. But I feel like the
yeah.
midfield. I think Morata is a perfect signing. I think he's going to score goals.
Yeah.
Definitely, I think it's a very good signing. And obviously, just got to. I think another issue is the Liao situation as well. I feel like Liao sometimes he's a great player, but sometimes his confidence goes, and when it goes,
Mm,
he can go missing in games. And I felt like that game he was okay, but yeah, sometimes he was missing. But I think of a lot of players that have been there for a while haven't really stepped up to the high level that they should. And I think it's whether the
mm,
manager starts to challenge that a bit more. So I think a bit more complacent, being like that some of these players are always going to be in the lineup, and they've kind of been complacent because of that. So I feel like maybe some strength and depth to kind of push the first team players to perform a bit more. Um,
mm,
but my question would be the managerial choice. Like, do you think Fonseca is the right man for the job? Because I still have my reservations. I feel like it's not
mm.
really a progress as much as Pioli. Like, I don't see much difference between him and Pioli. So I don't know what you thought about that.
Yeah, I've always been skeptical about him since his first spell with Roma, for example. A lot of hype because of what he achieved with Shakhtar Donetsk at the time. And then you kind of look at how kind of with Roma, he never got them to push on. And maybe when you look at that squad, he had some good players, and I do feel with Fonseca, he's a person that has maybe matured over time, so he's got better understanding, maybe a bit more astute on the sidelines, but there is question marks for me. I don't think he's necessarily the man that progresses Milan any further. When you look at like what Pioli achieved with the squad, I think there's definitely some criticisms his way. His record against Inter, for example, was terrible. Um, it didn't feel like he necessarily had a plan, like a plan B sometimes. And I think that is definitely constructive criticism that should be swayed towards Pioli. Now with Fonseca, there is this kind of anticipation. It sounds like he's got on board with the players, he's trying to develop them. And that's where I think they brought him in, is that they can see that if they can develop their players, they can either push them on in terms of transfers or they will become a staple within the side. The problem I find is that I don't think Fonseca is necessarily a massive upgrade on Pioli. When you think about the kind of types of personnel that they could have brought into that role, I think there's a project there. Dare I say it, would a Gasperini entertain something like a Milan job? Because I know he obviously is tarnished from his time from Inter, for example. But realistically, you want someone that can maybe push this squad on in terms of footballing philosophy. And I think Milan are trying to do the right things. It seems off the pitch now. It's just a question of whether they got the right coach to push them on in terms of that kind of tactical nous. And I question it. If you put Gasperini against Fonseca, I think Gasperini gets the better of him every day. I think he knows what to do in each occasions. Dare I say it, I think even Allegri could probably outdo Fonseca sometimes. And I'm not Allegri's biggest fan. And I just think there could have been a lot more progressive candidates that they could have had. De Zerbi was one of them that was linked. By all accounts, there was no meeting. So that's a bit disappointing when you consider De Zerbi is a Milan man, and they could have got him for nothing, right? Because he decided to leave Brighton. So I just think, yeah, Milan could have done a lot better in terms of that window. But before we kind of leave the Milan Torino stuff, I wanted to kind of talk about Ricky, who I really do like as a midfielder. I think he's going to be one that pushes on this season for Torino. Do you see, because I know he was included initially in the Italian Azzurri kind of provisional squads, do you see potentially him pushing on this season, maybe making claim in that national side?
Definitely. I think he's a centre midfielder that the national team doesn't really have. Again, a bit more progressive on the
Mm,
ball, a bit more dynamism. I think would have really suited the actual call to the national team for the Euros that just went over certain players. But yeah, he definitely offers something different. And I feel like a good run in again with Torino this season, pushing further forward. Obviously, I think the main thing for him will be adding more, goal contributions to his game. Because I feel like he's not as more. He could definitely do more than what he does. So it's just whether he kind of bridges that gap a bit more. But certainly he's at the right club to do it because he's going to be playing week in week out, and he's the main man for the team as well to carry them forward. So yeah, I feel like definitely he's got the right steps to do well this season for sure.
Well, let's move on to Stadio Eni Tardini, where we saw obviously Parma back in Serie A for the first time, and they took on your very own Viola, Andrea. They secured a 1-1 draw. Fantastic performance from the likes of Dennis Mann, a player that I really do rate, and I think he will push on this season. And yeah, Parma, I would say, pragmatic. They played with a lot of, I'd say, enthusiasm, and in that first half, they really contained Fiorentina. Fiorentina, on the other hand, obviously coming off the summer, a lot of optimism about what Palladino could do with this squad, and you've got some interesting additions already. Probably not helped by the latest bit of business, Nicky Gonzalez being linked with moves, and that's probably disrupted the camp to some extent. But how did you see that performance? Because yeah, it seems like from a Viola point of view, anyway, it's quite disappointing, and in particular that kind of debut by Pomgranjic, obviously getting sending off, not ideal, right?
Yeah, I think I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I think it was woeful performance. I think we
Mm.
secured the draw rather than Parma. I think we were that bad. Um, but no, definitely. I think the worry was the fluidity, and I felt like in midfield, in particular, the two centre mids, there wasn't there's not much pace and kind of like dominance, like box to box kind of feel in
Mm.
them. Like Amrabat played, which was a real surprise. I still don't understand how he was there, but considering he wants to leave. But even he felt like a shade of himself that he was when he
Mm.
was at Fiorentina previously. But I felt like the centre midfield, the two we had in midfield, Mandragora and wasn't as dynamic. Um, I think the other issue was that with the system, I felt like it was quite surprising because in pre-season, Palladino was playing Biraghi as like a left centre back and Parisi as like the
Mm.
left wing back, which worked well. But I feel like playing Biraghi there for me was a big issue because I feel like if you're going to play like a 3-4-3 system, I feel like your two wingers, wing backs, right mids, whatever you want to call them, they need to be rapid, really, and they need
Mm.
to be able to do both sides of the game to high levels because it demands a lot of work going forward and going defence. And I felt like there was times where Biraghi had like the whole field to run at, and he couldn't do it because he's not really that fast. He's never really been that fast player.
Yeah.
So I just would have preferred if he dropped a bit and someone like a Parisi could have came in who loves to run with the ball, dribble. Because you could see on Dodo's side that it was working well. Dodo on that side was going forward so much and creating a lot of chances. And I feel
Mm.
like just because that left side didn't have it, I felt like we kind of lacked a bit of energy there. Um, but also, I just think as well, it was quite rigid, the football. Parma had a very high press, which can be obviously can affect your possession, but you should be good enough there. Should be players good enough to be able to play with the ball and get out of the situations. But it just felt like every time Parma pressed, Fiorentina lost the ball within their own half, which is not really good enough. And if they're going to progress, that's something that's got to be fixed quite quickly. So a lot
Mm.
of it went wrong. Only thing I'd say is that Obviously, there's a lot of players still to come in. I'm very excited about the signing of Ame Richardson. I hadn't heard of him until like the Olympics, to be fair. So I haven't really watched him. So I was watching him on the Olympics, and obviously you go on the YouTube highlights. But I just
Yeah.
think he looks like a type of midfielder that would want to dominate and kind of be that kind of like big impact player in the center of midfield. And I just think he'd be perfect for this formation. So I'm hoping for him to get into the side as soon as possible as well. Like to see Baragi drop as the left centre back for allowing Parisi to play more, because I think that will work really well. And obviously Goodmanson coming in as well. So I think there's a lot of situations. Kolpani for me, I'm very excited with. I felt he had a good game. I
Yeah.
was quite upset that he got subbed off quite early on. I was a bit shocked with that because I thought,
Yeah.
but and Moise Kean, I think will do well. A lot of people are doubting him, but I think I'm his biggest fan at the moment. I'm backing him, like, but I feel like he will do well.
Yeah. I think we'll question that at the end of the season, that's for sure. But yeah, both myself and Rory aren't so sure about Moses Kane and his abilities, only shown by his kind of pre-event duties that he had to do. But we'll kind of cover over that, Andrea, for your benefit. But yeah, I suppose for me, Parma, exciting with Fabio Pecha. I talked about them last season. I think they're going to be interesting anyway entity to the league. And I'm hoping, they are able to add a few more additions. Like I say, Almqvist into that squad is a good addition. They've got some good players already there that got them up from Serie B to Serie A. It's just great to see like a staple like Parma back in the league. But yeah, mindful of time, I'm going to move on and talk about Juventus and Como. We've given enough time not to talk about Juventus, so we might as well talk about Juventus in a positive light, because actually, I think it was pleasantly surprising to see like Juventus play the football that they did. That's the football that their fans have been craving. I think pre-kickoff, a lot of their fan base were going absolutely apeshit at the depth of their team and the actual announcement of the 11. But they actually delivered. They played really well. One thing you have to credit to Motta is how he's managed to kind of develop this kind of fluid style of football. And it was just exciting again. It was just on the eye, really good football. And, I think obviously there's a few question marks for myself around Vlahovic. Now, it's probably a bit harsh on Vlahovic, but I think he's going to need to learn to be more selfish this season. Now, we had our friend Francesco attend the match yesterday, and he was saying that a lot of the crowd around him was kind of the same sentiment about Vlahovic, that he needs to be a lot more assertive. When you look at the chances as well, there was one in particular where I thought, goal. And for some reason, he hits it straight at Pepe Reina. Now, from your point of view, you've obviously seen Vlahovic when he was at his most clinical part of his career at Fiorentina. Where do you think it's going wrong for him? Do you think he's trying too hard, or is there just parts of him that maybe that we didn't see at Fiorentina that we are now seeing highlighted a little bit more at Juventus?
Yeah, I would agree with him. The idea that he's trying a bit too hard. I feel like at Fiorentina he was naturally the main guy that we looked at every time the long ball. He was chesting it down, laying it off. Like he's always been that. When he was at Fiorentina, he was always that main guy that started the attack and finished it off. I feel like at Juventus there's a lot of expectation on him, but also I feel like he needs to learn and adapt. That there's other players around him that are gonna support him as much. But I feel like it's a confidence thing as well, because he does have a lot of shots and doesn't take them as much as he should. And in that game in particular, there was a couple of chances he should have scored. And I feel like that's always been a bit of a worry with him since he's
Yeah,
joined Juventus. He's had these seasons where he's missing these chances.
yeah.
And it's just that maybe adapting to the system. But it's something that hopefully maybe Motta will get more out of him. He's certainly getting into the right areas, so there's nothing questioning that. I
Yeah.
just think it's, um, I think he's just trying to, because I feel like he thinks maybe he's still having that Fiorentina mentality where he was the main guy, and literally, if he didn't score, Fiorentina would win the game, or they wouldn't do well. Maybe he's kind of having that similar thing of like him leading the line, he has to score the goals. So I feel maybe there's a bit of like pressure and overconfidence. Maybe he might underconfidence he might have, but other than that, he's he's got all the right attributes to be a top striker, and I still think he'll come through. But I don't know if it'll be this season or maybe under a few years at Motti, we might start to see that a bit more.
One other aspect that I have to credit in terms of the way Juventus approached it was their kind of control of the game. Like, even when in the second half, it didn't look like they'd probably were going full throttle in terms of attacking style, they controlled the tempo of the game. And that, I think, is a massive upgrade in terms of the approach. And in particular, it'll be fascinating because I think, obviously, the caveat we have to kind of apply here, it's only Como, right? This is a team that only just come up from Serie B. This is a massive shock, and we'll talk about them in a second. But yeah, I feel from a Juventus point of view, look, this is only Como. What will they deliver when they're against the bigger sides? And obviously, one of the question marks that I have is, the depth of quality. And I think that is going to play out if they don't add a few more additions. Now, it's speculated Nicky Gonzalez is going to be one of those that does come through. However, I don't feel that's enough. I feel they need another striker, for example. I think they need some more midfielders. They probably need some more defenders, to be brutally honest. Do you feel Juventus have had a good window up until this point, or do you think it's still not good enough?
Yeah, no, I'd have to agree. I still think they need more players. So I don't think it's been that good. I'm still in shock with the players they've sold, like Sula and Huijsen that went to Bournemouth. Like those two players would have been in the team straight away, in my
Yeah,
opinion, if I was the
100%.
manager.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think they've lacked a lot of the signings in key positions as well. And again, a lot of too much transfer speculation here as well. There's too much like kind of
Mm,
hindering the kind of like overall morale.
yeah.
But yeah, we'll have to wait and see. But certainly there is a lot of things affecting them in that sense.
In Como, obviously, probably a rude awakening for Cesc Fabregas. What did you make of them? And do you think they probably need to add a few more additions into the squad as well?
Yeah, definitely. I've actually have them down as to get relegated. I
Or,
hope they stay up
yeah.
because I like Fabregas a lot.
Mm,
I like him a lot, but I just think as it stands, I'm not convinced with kind of the kind of fluidity of the team um, under pressure. I felt like in that Juventus game, I know it's only one game, but I felt like it was so easy for Juventus to win that game as well. Like in
mm,
the final third, it was quite slow start, um, and this is the issue having Belotti up front. Um,
yeah.
he's a great goal scorer, but he does slow you down, and I witnessed that last year. It was painful. As much as he can score goals, he can
Yeah.
be clinical, and that's my only worry. I just feel like when they get to the final third, it's whether they can create those chances effectively and quicker. Whereas with Belotti up
Mm,
front, I feel like a lot of it will just come to get out wide and cross it into him. And I feel like over time, if they don't really improve that final third area, yeah, that could be a worry. I also think defensively, I'm a bit worried about them as well.
mm,
Even with the Varane signing, I'm not convinced with him either. I know he's injured at the moment, I think,
yeah.
but I'm still not convinced with the defense. They're going to concede goals. Like I said, that Juventus didn't really need to get out of. They played well, but they didn't really need to get out of third gear, definitely.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they've got a lot of question marks, and I feel like even if you play some decent football, that's never enough. And we've seen that time and time again, where teams try and play like they played in the league below, thinking that that would be enough, but it really isn't. You get found out a
Mm,
lot. The quality is there. You're against teams that are going to punish you for even the smallest mistake. And I feel like Cornwall, unless they improve, that might happen for them as well this season.
yeah. When you've got the likes of Cutrone and Petagna in your squads, I think that's a sign of players that aren't really
Yeah.
up to Serie A standards, and that's a worrying sign. So let's see what the next few game weeks really develop for Como. But yeah, hopefully they have enough to stay up this season. Let's move to another kind of similar topic in some respects, and that was Roma drawing against Calgary. Calgary, fantastic in this game, in particular. David Nicola, you know what to expect. It was a very open game, though, Andrea. It was end to end. And although nil-nil probably doesn't do it justice, I felt Calgary probably deserved all 3 points on the basis of how they approached it. And yes, Roma did carve open opportunities. Lorenzo Pellegrini had the ball in the back of the net. But it was only until the kind of introduction of Paulo Dybala, who was on the bench for this match, that they started to have a bit more quality up top. And he set up Dovbyk. Dovbyk hits the crossbar. And, the opportunities were happening when Dybala was on the pitch. Now, Dybala is an interesting conversation in itself because it sounds like he's waiting for confirmation if Roma are going to accept a bid from Saudi for him to move on. By all accounts, potentially he might have already accepted terms. But regardless of that whole situation, Roma looked poor in general in terms of they were quite less fluid than they have shown for the last season under De Rossi. I feel that they are still missing a few signings. Mateus Sule was okay, nothing special in this particular match. And these are the players, like Dovbyk, Sule, you need them to step up. If the amount of money that's been spent on them, you need them to step up. Do you think this is a worry for De Rossi going into the new season that, that this has happened? I mean, sometimes it's a blessing that this happens at this stage in the season, right? But this is a worrying sign that actually these players were brought in to kind of increase the depth of quality. And actually, on that performance alone, they are lacking. They are lacking across the board. So do you see a way out for Roma? And potentially, do you see them selling Dybala? That seems a really odd one, right?
I feel like Dybala will end up staying. I just have a feeling, but I feel
Mm,
like Dovbyk and Sule have been very they're very good players. Like I'm pretty sure they will come through this season. My only worry with Roma, and I feel like the main worry for me, and while I don't see them going as far as other teams in the league, is the centre mids and defence. I look at it, it's very same as last year, and I don't think it's strong enough. Like I really do
mm,
feel like against top quality teams that they are going to concede goals, and I feel like that would be my main worry. It would be that that haven't really improved defensively, and
mm,
also the centre mid, the Enzo Lefebvre, I think his name is. He looks okay. He might be like a very good bargain of a player, but I'm still not fully convinced either with him as the partner to
mm,
Pellegrini. So I think my main worry is still that area of defence and kind of like the midfield just in front of it. Having said that, I think they're making the right signings. I feel like Sula and Dovic are really top quality signings, and that is the beginning of a very exciting 11 they could build. But right now, there's too many issues in that team for me that sees me seeing them having issues going into against
mm.
stronger teams. I don't know how you think, but I just feel like defensively in particular, I feel like they're going to concede a lot of goals.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. I think De Rossi will be judged on this season more than he was with last season. This is going to be key for him to ensure that he gets a good, strong hand on this Roma side. Look, the board have backed him. It's important that he follows it up with results. As you allude to, I don't think necessarily that they're strong at the back, potentially. I think the midfield is really imbalanced, personally. I
Yeah.
think that's where the struggles are going to be this season is that they haven't got necessarily the personnel to push them on. I think personally, Pellegrini should potentially look at maybe going into a register role because I think he slows down the tempo for them as well. So, there's lots of elements to Roma. Again, it feels like a Napoli, doesn't it? It feels like it needs a rebuild. Unfortunately, this team is full of Mourinho's has-beens. They've got a lot of his staples, and they need to get rid of that. And I don't think that's going to happen overnight, unfortunately, with the kind of squads. And you're requiring people to really put some money into this as well. So yes, Roma, it's going to be tough. Calgary, all I can say is potentially let's see if you can carry it on because I think the home form is really the kind of staple for them. They need to ensure that the home form keeps them up because last season they used home form and some of the way kind of wins away from Sardinia, so they need to do the same this time as well. But finally, Andrea, we are going to talk about the defending champs, and that is Inter. They entertained us on the opening day of this game week 1 with a fantastic 2-2 draw. Now, I'm sure they don't see it as fantastic. However, there is some question marks to be raised about Inter. Genoa, I think they were full credit, and this is something I wanted to raise, is Gilardino. He's a man that looks like he's destined for a bigger job. And it again, we were talking about Milan. This guy is the person that can step up to Milan and make them exciting. Look, if you look at like Genoa, they don't spend a lot of money. They've had to sell a lot of players. They probably won't reinvest that because they're having to pay off debts at the moment as well. But there was so much fight in that team. There was so much tenacity. And just to quickly kind of read out the results, that Gilardino achieved last season, forgetting about this result in itself, they drew against Inter, they drew against Milan, they were unbeaten against Juve last season, they won and drew against Bologna, unbeaten versus Napoli, beat Roma, and they beat Lazio. Phenomenal when you consider the kind of group of personnel that he's managed to assemble as a squad, the style of football. It is attractive. Granted, they have to play pragmatic at times, but Gilardino, he's a man for the future, right? He is going to get a bigger job eventually, right?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Honestly, the results speak for themselves as well. I already think maybe the end of next season because I feel like Genoa will be
Mm,
definitely in a transition period. They already kind of are, and I feel like end of season
yeah.
they will be definitely, no matter where they finish. So yeah, I feel even next season, as early as that, if there's a job available, I feel like he will be one of the top targets for sure. He's got all the stylistic things of a manager that like teams want, kind of the attacking flair in the final third in particular. And he's getting out of the best of players that aren't, necessarily the greatest of players either. And like you said, he's had to
Mm,
rely on very low budget and kind of make it work. And look, they've lost Goodmanson and Retegui in one big window, which is a massive loss,
yeah.
and have managed to turn that around with Vitinha stepped up and he was so impressive that game. There was that
Mm,
run he did in the last minute was unbelievable. He won the free kick.
yeah.
Yeah, that was insane. I don't know if you saw that. That was insane.
Yes.
But yeah, they've got players that stepped up. So I think they'll have a good season. And yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think he will get a big job soon.
On the other hand, Inter obviously went into this match. Um, I feel like they are lacking some depth at the back. They've up top, they've made sure there's been some improvements in the likes of Teremi, and they've also brought in Zelinski. But it seems like a quiet window purely based on the fact that they did a lot of the rebuild last summer. Obviously, Marcus Thuram had a fantastic game in particular for this match, and he looks such a bargain buy. Given that they didn't actually spend a penny, they've only spent it on wages. But again, what a phenomenal signing that is. But it's at the back where the issues are because obviously it was expected that Tajon Buchanan was going to be the left-hand sided player, obviously injured out until January, so that screws up that kind of ability. And obviously, Acerbi isn't getting any younger. Obviously, they did have Juan Bisek, and he gave away the penalty that eventually allowed Genoa to get back into this match. But even Jan Sommer obviously was very unstable, and it wasn't his usual performance. So they have brought in, ironically, Josip Martinez from Genoa, and he looks like he's going to be the long-term replacement for Jan Sommer eventually. But in terms of that kind of back line, if you're an Inter fan, you're probably expecting maybe an addition before the end of this window. I mean, would you agree that that's probably an area that they need to just be on top of because they've got a long season, not only domestically, but also they've got the Cups and they've got the Champions League?
No, I completely agree. I think that's the main area. It's ironic as well because they're always linked with centre backs. They play for it at the back. They're always linked with centre backs. I think to be fair, I think what's kind of maybe ruined their plans a bit was Scalvini. I feel like he was going to go to Inter.
Mm,
He didn't get the injury. I think that was the guy. And I think if they got him, we'd maybe have a different conversation now. But yeah, they're going to have to find someone. I'm not too sure who they're looking at, but it's definitely someone they're going to look at for sure. I think though, to be honest, going into the game, I felt like yes, they look frail and stuff, but I also had a feeling of like, to be honest, last season was so perfect. Um,
mm,
I feel like they have such a high expectation that anything even a little bit lower than that, everyone's going to question their kind of performance. So I kind of felt for them a bit as well. I feel like I wouldn't like get carried away that it might be a big problem. I still think they're top quality, but at the same time, they're not like they're not like a Man City or something either. You're gonna guarantee it. Like they're gonna get found out at times. They're gonna have to. They're gonna be pushed to the limits in the next few years. So they're gonna really have to strengthen in depth. But yeah, for the time being, I think that there is that concern. But I feel like because of that high expectation of last year, like last year when you'd expect when they were 2-1 up, if it was last year, they would have got over the line. They probably would have scored a third. It would have been
Yeah.
done. But the fact that they didn't and they actually conceded in the last minute and they almost conceded a third. Actually, they almost lost the game in the last kick of the game. So I think that would be like it feels like a different mentality because you like when it was 1-1, we all felt, as we know, Inter, they're going to score. You just know,
Yeah.
and they did.
Yeah.
But it's just, I think it's a shock because there's such high expectation that Genoa's equalise. It's like, wait a second, this is different. This is not normally Inter. So I think that's kind of the feeling that I'm getting, and I think a lot of people have gotten. But I feel like we shouldn't get carried away either. I feel like they're champions. They're the best team in the league for a reason, and I see them coming back as well. But certainly, yes, defense they need to strengthen. At least one addition, centre back. Just interesting to see who they look at, though. That's the interesting one.
Yeah, and for me, maybe DeMarco as well. I think he's a bit complacent at that left-hand side, and sometimes he actually needs to be dropped because I think he has a good game once every 3 games. Personally, that's the way I see it. Is that he is? Don't get me wrong, great left foot, and he can be phenomenal. But actually, he needs someone to push him a little bit harder at times. And yeah, because he doesn't have necessarily that competition. I think that's the element for him. But Andrea, fascinating to talk about game week 1. And for the viewers as well as the listeners, I'm going to take you through game week 2 fixtures. So let's start off by talking about Saturday. And hopefully you'll be listening to this in advance of this actual kind of fixture lineup. So we'll start off at 5:30 in Parma as they take on AC Milan. Now that fixture back in the day, Andrea, was a classic. But then also at 5:30 we've got Udinese at home to Lazio, and at 7:45 on Saturday we've got Inter at home to Lecce. So Lecce obviously hoping to get some points, probably going to struggle here. And the other fixture at 7:45 on Saturday is Monza at home to Genoa. We'll move into Sunday's fixtures, and at 5:30 UK time this is Fiorentina at home to Venezia. So for your very self, Andrea, hopefully that's 3 points guaranteed, but we'll never know, will we? The other game at 5:30 is Torino at home to Atalanta, which will be a very interesting game, especially if Raul Bellanova does make that transfer across before that game. Then 7:45 we've got Roma taking on Empoli, and Napoli at home against Bologna. And then we move to the famous fixture on Monday night, which is 5:30, Calgary at home to Como. And then at 7:45, we've got Hellas Verona at home to Juventus. So we'll see if Hellas Verona can follow up on that result from this game week. But that's it, Andrea. Many thanks to you. Before we kind of bid you farewell, obviously you're going to be more of a permanent fixture with us on this pod. You're actually going to be contributing a lot more, but given that you've actually changed your handle, you're going to have to inform the listener and viewers where they can catch you.
Yes, I have changed the name from previous. It's now Calcio Fiore. That's the handle on TikTok. I've also created Instagram as well, so it's on there, and Twitter. And actually now potentially starting YouTube soon, so watch the space. But yeah, it's still Calcio Fiore as well.
Great stuff. And more importantly, make sure you give this video a like. And if you're listening to us on the podcast, be appreciated if you can give us a rating. Let us know what your thoughts are. Did you enjoy this episode? Did you enjoy our comments? And more importantly, if you don't, let us know what you didn't agree with. But most importantly, make sure you follow the Anglo-Italian podcast. You can find us at Anglo-Italian Pod on Instagram and TikTok. And if you're looking for us on Twitter, or X as they call it these days, it's at Italian Anglo Pod. So that's it for game week 1. Make sure you join us for game week 2. And more importantly, if you want to catch up on your Premier League section, we're also available in the next podcast. So make sure you check us out there. But for now, ciao, ciao. and we'll see you next week.